Now, more than ever, coding seems like a great skill to learn. But before you can start working on the next big thing, there's a lot you need to learn. And unfortunately, coding can have a pretty steep learning curve. And I know this from experience because I gave up on coding several times before I was finally able to get it to stick. Trust me, I can relate. So these are the 5 pieces of non-technical advice that I would give to anyone who's learning how to code for the first time. This is what I wish I had heard 10 years ago when I was first learning how to code, but hopefully it can help some of you. All right, thing number 1, fundamentals. Focus on building a really strong foundation. It's really tempting, especially early on, to just go and start trying to experiment with all the cool stuff because there's a ton of cool stuff when it comes to this space, but it's really important to strike the right balance between experimenting and trying out lots of new things and learning the core aspects of coding. The way that I generally recommend doing this is just to make sure you're constantly reinforcing the things that you've previously learned. So every time you go to code, maybe spend the first 15 minutes just reinforcing everything you did in your most recent couple of sessions. Whatever level that you're at, make sure you're drilling home those fundamentals, and then once you've done that for your first 15 minutes, go do the fun stuff. Keep experimenting, keep learning, make sure you keep growing as you're learning more about coding. I used to recommend books a lot to people when they were first getting started. I'd say just pick up a book, start working through it. At this point, there's so many great free resources online that are interactive, like Free Code Camp or Codecademy, that I would say if you're looking for something like that to follow along with, there's a lot of great free resources. You don't even have to crack a book if you don't like to do that. However you decide to do it though, just remember not to move too fast. There's definitely a hump you need to get over when it comes to learning how to code, just a different way of thinking, a lot of things to remember. So have some patience, make sure you keep drilling home those fundamentals, and that's gonna make your life a whole lot easier. Something that I really used to try to drill home with new developers was the importance of typing out your own code. One, it's really good for muscle memory to really learn all the commands and the syntax for typing something, but also just to make sure that you understand what you're actually doing. It's super easy to jump onto something like Stack Overflow and just type up your question, find the answer, copy paste it, drop it in the code, and to keep moving. That's a shortcut to get something working. That is not you actually learning and building an understanding of why that answer works. And that, to me, is the really important thing to understand when you're learning to code, which is, why does that piece of code do what it just did? Of course, in recent years, coding has changed drastically, and gone are the days of really needing to go on an internet forum and asking a question, because now you can just ask an AI, it'll generally do a pretty good job of giving you a solid answer. To be completely clear, I think this is awesome. I use GitHub Copilot on a daily basis as part of my workflow, and it has increased my velocity significantly. There's no doubt in my mind, when I am using Copilot, I code much faster. The real difference here though is that I've been coding for 10 years, which means that AI is not a crutch, it's actually just a catalyst. It's able to help me code a lot faster, but I can still write all of the code by hand if I needed to. Leaning too much on AI early on before you learn how to write code might make it more challenging to not have AI by your side for any time when you can't use AI. Maybe that's in an interview, or when you're taking a test in college, or just when you're doing debugging. So I think the AI is awesome. I encourage everyone to try it because it's transformative and it's only going to keep getting better. But if you aren't ever writing any of your own code and you're always just tabbing to complete or copy pasting, it's going to be really challenging for you to actually write code from scratch in those situations when you still need to. Number 3, make mini projects. When you're first getting started, you're going to be doing a lot of really small programs that are specifically designed around one thing, whether that's calling a method or building a loop or just printing out a certain output to the console. It's kind of like running drills in a sport or practicing your scales in music. It's a great way of mastering those building blocks that are going to become a huge part of all of your future projects. But I also think that it's really important to practice putting all of those things together on a slightly larger scale and exercising everything you've learned with a little bit of problem solving, and maybe stretching yourself just a little bit further to have to figure out some things along the way that maybe you haven't learned yet in whatever tutorial or curriculum that you're following. It doesn't need to be anything too complicated. It could just be a simple calculator app, or one of my old favorites when I was learning how to code was building a bookstore simulation where you keep track of your transactions, you keep track of inventory and stuff like that. And it's really exciting to actually get to build something that feels a little bit more real, to take all those puzzle pieces and learn how to put them together instead of just following a tutorial where things are kind of being handed to you. Number 4, commit to a daily coding habit for at least 2 months. So I want to preface this by saying that I tried learning how to code several times before I really got it to stick. I'd get super excited about it for a couple of weeks. I'd jump into something that was way too complicated for what I could handle. I'd get frustrated, I wouldn't really be able to make the progress I wanted to be able to make, and I would give up. And then fast forward a couple of years, and this whole process would repeat. And coding didn't really click for me until the summer before my sophomore year, and the reason why it finally did click for me is because I started writing C++ just about every day. And coding at that frequency over the course of the summer, which let's call it about 2 months, meant that I was able to start the summer on day one knowing basically nothing about coding, and by the end of the summer I had learned enough that I was able to fly through the material for the C++ course I had signed up for because I had already learned almost all of the material over the summer. I focused on the fundamentals and I practiced regularly. Going back to the first part of this video, nailing down those fundamentals, it's super important. I was constantly reinforcing what I was learning, but it still did not make the process easy. I can still remember specific bugs and mistakes that I made 10 years ago when I was learning how to code, and it's obvious to me now, looking at those mistakes, that I just fundamentally didn't know what was going on. And that frustration is why so many people quit. Getting over the hump requires a lot of time and effort, but once you do it, coding gets a lot easier, and dare I say it, even enjoyable. But if you don't put in the time consistently and you don't get over that hump, what it means is you'll probably end up giving up after a little while, and you'll have to relearn everything the next time you get the urge to try coding again. It might take you less than 2 months, it might take you more than 2 months, but I think that's a pretty good guidepost, at least based on my own experience, of how long you need to be consistently putting in the effort to really see the results, to get over that hump, and to not be worried about regressing. Point number 5, pick a language and stick to it. One of my biggest misconceptions when I was first learning how to code was that I thought that becoming a better developer just meant learning more languages. I remember being really antsy to pick up another language before I really even knew C++, because it just seemed really cool and exciting to also start learning about either Objective-C or Java or Python. And over time, if you stick with programming, you definitely will. At this point, I have done legitimate coding in about 10 languages. That's not including the 50 languages I used when I wrote Hello World for a video once. You can watch that video if you haven't already. That was kind of a fun one. But early on, it's a lot more important to learn about thinking in terms of code than learning the syntax of any specific language. Every programming language is different, and that does go beyond the syntax. There are reasons to use a language and reasons not to use a language. But when you're first learning how to code, that's not what you need to be thinking about. You're just learning how to tell the computer to do one thing if a certain condition is met, and if not, to do something else, or to do a certain operation a specific number of times, or just learning how to store and relate different pieces of data. You're learning how to put together a program that tells the computer what to do, and you happen to be doing it in a certain language. But the reality is, once you learn how to structure a program and how, writing code works, it's really not too hard to jump from one language to a different language. So focus on building proficiency in whatever language you happen to be using, not learning how to write basic programs in 5 different languages. You'll pick up new languages over time as you need them, and that can be a lot of fun. It can unlock new types of development, but you don't need to be doing that from day one. And one last thing, try not to overthink what the best language is for getting started. I have seen countless debates online about, different schools of thought for which language makes sense to get started with. There are definitely languages that I would say are not the best to get started in, that I would not recommend getting started with, but as long as you're picking something reasonable, you're probably going to be fine. Anyways, that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.